Number 2 now. Now I'm going to have to probably do this in more than one video, and I'll probably have to come back to this article another time because it's quite a long one. I'm not going to be able to do this all today. But another article I came across quite interesting. It's called Autism. This is on autism diagnosis. It's called Autism Diagnosis as a Social Process, and the article is from Sage Journals, first published July of 2021. So this is looking at autism diagnosis. Some studies identify a pressure to diagnose to enable access to services. In the UK, a survey of clinicians found that 76% had upgraded a diagnosis to autism when faced with unclear presentation or patients failing to meet criteria on diagnostic tools. Diagnosis can be shaped by a tension between meeting criteria and or meeting patient needs. So I thought that was quite interesting, and this shows how sometimes people are getting diagnosed with autism who don't actually meet the criteria but are presenting with a significant clinical need that the clinician feels obliged to meet, and the only way they can meet it is by giving them a diagnosis, even if it doesn't quite fit. So this shows how autism diagnosis is not an exact thing, and I guess in short of having a blood test and a biological test for autism, there's no way of ensuring that diagnosis is ever completely exact. Indeed, by the way, I know of one person in my area who used to work in my area who actually said that she would sometimes give out a diagnosis or fudge the evidence, I think as she put it, fudge the evidence if someone was presenting with extreme need but who didn't necessarily meet the full criteria. She actually admitted that. So this article confirms that this does happen in quite a number of instances, and obviously this could potentially result in overdiagnosis, potentially. I would say though the question is not so much overdiagnosis, is because I think diagnosis is important, but I think the issue is more what condition are you diagnosed with, and we probably need greater psychiatric rigour, and we probably need the creation of new conditions, as clearly not all of these people are autistic, because obviously autism is something that we're still trying to work out what exactly it is. But at least based upon the kind of prototypical understanding of autism, these people might not be autistic, but they might have other conditions and still need a diagnosis, and obviously still have great support needs. And currently, because there aren't any other conditions that can adequately fit them, they're diagnosed autistic even though that might not fit. So let me know what you think about that. So, one of the issues that clinicians sometimes face is institutional pressure. There's time pressure on assessment process, leading to restricted assessments, limitations on access to different professional expertise, and also increasing referrals are leading to long waiting lists, contributing to pressure on the amount of time allowed for assessment. And this can result in less time to do a full school observation, for example in children, resulting in increased diagnosis rates. Again, potential over-diagnosis of autism. If you can't do a complete school observation, you're not going to get all of the information. And it says here that the robustness of assessment has been compromised. There's also limitations on access to different professional expertise because of underfunding. So a person might not see that many experts. They might just see, say, one person, and it just goes on their say-so, which can, if you ask me, is a bit dodgy. And one clinician felt it's important to consider the desires, the identity of patients. Others felt that it could be a case for diagnosis if it would help the patient, taking a needs-led approach as opposed to a criteria-led approach, especially in threshold cases. And there's also difficulties of managing the expectations of patients and families who are invested in an autism diagnosis. So I suppose say someone who is self-diagnosed themselves autistic, and you know my thoughts on that, goes along for an assessment and is convinced they're autistic and nothing's going to sway them. The clinician says, no, you're actually not, based on what you're saying and the evidence and stuff. how is a clinician going to deal with a person who's likely going to feel very upset because they've invested themselves in that diagnosis. Clinicians were aware that adults coming for assessment could research autism symptoms to prepare for assessment and even rehearse. They could go on the internet to read criteria, so they would say the right things, which could skew the assessment. And this could also extend to individuals repeatedly seeking assessment despite a negative diagnosis. And also, of course, we have confirmation bias as well, and all the issues around confirmation bias. Diagnosis can be uncertain when there are co-occurring conditions, so how do you pick apart all the different conditions from autism? And one clinician interviewed said, we have to give a binary outcome, but in reality, autism can be viewed as more of a spectrum. For example, where people don't quite meet the criteria, or they have few difficulties, or a person can show traits without meeting the full diagnosis. So yeah, I mean, there are no clear-cut right or wrong answers to this, really. I mean, this comes down to psychiatric ethics and philosophy. And as I say, we really don't really know much yet what autism is, really, do we? Let's face it. Autism is very much I mean, what is autism? I mean, you could go by the criteria definition and the prototypical definition of autism, which would reduce autism to a very narrow thing indeed. That's one approach. Or you could say that autism evolves and shifts and changes and more people are brought under it who wouldn't originally have met that original narrow prototypical definition. That's another approach. Psychiatry evolves and so on. Some people argue that's progressive, other people say that actually no, that isn't progressive, that's making it harder to find out what's the cause of autism, creating more noise in the data, and that actually what we really need to do is break it up and create more conditions. I would argue that actually we do need to create more conditions, because I think that's the scientific thing to do. It doesn't make sense kind of having such a huge condition that covers so many different people. I think everyone needs a diagnosis if they're having difficulties, but I think that the diagnosis needs to be as prototypical as possible to their difficulties. In other words, like, it needs to be as homogenous as possible, and like that means that those diagnosed with that condition need to be as close to one another as possible, as it were, in terms of the difficulties they face. Obviously, they're still going to be different because everyone's individual. Like, we're not clones, you know what I mean? But like, and people talk about autism as a spectrum as though everyone's different, which is true. But like, if people become so different within that it's impossible to do research on it, then it becomes meaningless. There has to be a point where you say, okay, actually, this is getting too much now. We need to kind of split it off. I would say that also one of the crucial issues is impairment, and that has been lost in modern interpretations, particularly in the neurodiversity movement, where you're including lots of people who don't really have great impairment, who are going on about it being a superpower and crap like that, and they're causing a lot of damage. Because if it is so great, you really do not need a medical label, do you? There's also, again, then they talk, I really am going to have to come back to this because there's so many other points to do. Oh, actually, I am going to come back to this because I want to talk a bit more about my views on this. So, but let me know what you think of what I've said so far, and thank you for watching.